Nightfall in Nowhereville. As the sun set over the quiet town, a group of friends gathered in the old barn in Cindy's family farm to bid her farewell before she returned to the city. Cindy and her friends were the outsiders in this tight-knit community, but they had found solace in each other's company. Little did they know a slasher was on the loose, stalking the town and preparing a strike. As the night wore on, the tension mounted and the sense of impending doom grew stronger. Would they survive the night, or would they fall prey to an unknown terror lurking in the shadows? Throughout the night, there had been lots of drinking, and as the night grew darker, one of the friends excused herself to use the restroom in the field outside the barn. With the sounds of crickets and the rustling of leaves in the wind, she walked through the tall grass searching for a secluded spot. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the darkness, brandishing a sharp weapon. The friend tried to scream, but the killer covered her mouth with one hand, muffling her cries. With the other hand, the slasher plunged the weapon into the friend's chest repeatedly, causing blood to splatter everywhere. The friend's body slumped to the ground, lifeless. As the other friends grew impatient, they began to wonder what was taking her so long. Little did they know the slasher had already struck, and they were next on his list. As the rest of the friends grew worried about their missing friend, two of them decided to search for her in the field outside the barn. With flashlights in hand, they combed the area, calling out her name. Suddenly, they heard a rustling in the bushes and turned towards the sound. Before they could react, the slasher emerged from the shadows, his weapon glinting in the light. The two friends tried to run, but the killer caught up to them quickly, slashing at their backs with his weapon. The friends fell to the ground, their screams silenced by the brutal onslaught. Meanwhile, Cindy was left alone, taking in the final night of her small-town life, unaware of the horrors that awaited for her. As Cindy checked her watch, she wondered where everyone had gone. She assumed that her friends were up to one last prank, or maybe a surprise for her, so she decided to search for them. As she made her way outside the barn, she stumbled upon the bodies of her two friends, their lifeless eyes staring back at her. Horrified, she realized that this was no prank, this was real. Suddenly, out of the corner of the eyes, she saw the slasher as he appeared in front of her, his weapon raised, ready to strike. Cindy's survival instincts kicked in, and she turned and ran as fast as she could, with the killer hot on her heels. The chase took them through the fields and woods, with Cindy ducking and dodging as the slasher closed in. She could feel his breath on the back of her neck, and she knew she had to find a way to outsmart him or be his next victim. As the slasher closed in on Cindy, she quickly realized that she had to use her surroundings to her advantage. She grabbed a nearby branch and swung it at the killer, who deflected the blow with his weapon. They continued to fight, with Cindy using every tool at her disposal to stay alive. Finally, with a well-timed kick, she managed to disarm the killer, knocking the weapon out of his hand. With a burst of adrenaline, she sprinted toward the barn, knowing that the safety was within her grasp. As she reached the door, she turned back to see the killer slowly getting up, his identity now revealed. To her shock, the slasher was an estranged relative of hers, a cousin, who had always been jealous of the life she was able to live with her family. Cindy's heart sank as she realized that it was not just a random attack, but an act of vengeance. With tears streaming down her face, she ran inside the barn and locked the door behind her. She knew that she had to call the police and tell them everything. But for now, all she could do was wait and pray that the killer wouldn't find a way to break in. With her heart racing and her mind in overdrive, Cindy searched the barn for anything that could be used as a weapon to defend herself. As she rummaged through the old farm tools and equipment, she heard the sound of the killer trying to break down the door. Her time was running out. With a final burst of energy, Cindy grabbed a pitchfork and braced herself for the killer's final attack. The slasher, her cousin, burst into the barn, his face twisted into a grotesque mask of rage and hate. They fought furiously, with Cindy dodging and weaving around his attacks and striking back with deadly precision. The slasher was powerful, but Cindy was quicker and more agile. With a well-placed thrust, she managed to impale him with the pitchfork, but the fight was not over yet. As the slasher struggled to free himself, he stumbled and took a wrong step, falling onto a sharp piece of metal that had been left lying on the ground. With a sickening crunch, the killer's body went limp, and he slumped on the ground, dead. Cindy collapsed to her knees, her body shaking with exhaustion and relief. She had survived the nightmarish ordeal, but at a terrible cost. Her friends were gone, and she would never be the same. As the sun began to rise over the small town, she knew that her life would never be the same again. But, at least for now, the darkness had been defeated, and she was alive.